Welcome back to the X Podcast. I am sitting here with Timothy, recently deemed the Master Moore by Zachary Brown. Got toes in the sand, had to bring it back just once. Then we got Jesse James McCoy. By the way, on the way to France, I watched the other movie about you, the Brad Pitt version of where Jesse James is the cousin assassinates him. Have you seen that one?
Nope.
Anybody?
No, I don't.
It's kind of long
what
and
is this
depressing.
movie?
Brad Pitt's Jesse James movie. It's his rendition of him playing Jesse James.
Huh.
Okay.
It's from like, I mean, it's kind of older. It's like 2003, 4, 5.
I didn't even know that Jesse James was a real character or person or like.
What do you mean? You thought it was like
So just
mythical?
lore.
I thought that you like
Western?
Yes,
Created that nickname?
Yes, because that'd be a very breast nickname. To
Wait, you
create.
never heard of Jesse James?
Oh,
Is he an outlaw?
The most famous
Yes.
outlaw of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Him, Billy the
West.
Kid.
Okay.
Western.
I feel like maybe then I've heard of that, but I guess maybe let me rephrase. I didn't know Brad Pitt made movies about Jesse James.
I don't know if he makes movies plural, but
Yeah.
there he has. So there's two. I'm sure
Well, you
there's
just said two, so that's plural movies.
no. There's two really famous movies.
Yeah.
There may be more. Two really famous. There's one
Really famous might be a stretch.
Well, American Outlaws. That was what's his face's. What's the guy from Phone Booth? Colin something. You know what I'm
Colin
talking
Firth.
Not a clue what you're talking about.
Oh,
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
I'm
Anyways.
trying to think.
He's like an Australian
name?
actor.
Yeah,
he was
yeah,
a
yeah, I know who you're
heartthrob
talking
back in the day.
Yeah. I know who
Something
you're talking about.
Colin something. But anyways, he was in a movie called American Outlaws about Jesse James that I really loved. It was more like fun-loving, not really realistic, but I loved it.
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
Yep. That was like his first big movie, I think. But then there's one that Jesse James did that was a little bit more, I think, supposed to be the more accurate portrayal. Kind of long, meandering, depressing, about the person that assassinated him. The whole story leading up to the assassination. But anyways, thought that was important to interject.
Yeah.
We are we're experimenting today
Right.
with some theological questions. We've been on an experiment of just talking through maybe some deeper levels of spirituality than we normally have tackled in the past. I think last week started on an email sent in that had like 7 or 8 theology questions. We got through one question. So, especially as we approach the summer, maybe we'll just tackle more and more of this kind of stuff. But, a lot of times people will send in stuff about, even sovereignty of God, Calvinism, Arminianism. Maybe one day, we've touched on some of that stuff. Maybe one day
One of the questions was.
Yeah,
So
one of the
we have
questions
to,
was,
if we're
yes.
going through it.
Yes, we will. We'll dive right back into that, and we will solve the millennia age debate, Calvinism versus Arminianism. So it will be great. But there is another topic connected to the sovereignty of God, and it's one we've kind of, as you said, energetically debated off screen, and thought it'd be fun for the four of us to kind of tackle because it's both theological and relational, and hits home for some people. And it's this. And especially you always have brilliant insights, but also as next gen pastor teaching about love and such. Is there such a thing as the one? Does God have the one? Like, is there one person meant for people or not? And I already kind of know where this is going to go, but in some ways, I think. But why don't we just start around here?
Well, I've already preached on this before, so I've already stated my case. So I'll do it very quickly.
Yeah, let's go around. Okay,
I said, no, I don't believe that God has one identified soulmate that lives at the exact same time that you live, that is the one person you are supposed to be with. I won't say why. I don't know that we need to give why right now. We're just trying to give our position on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
here,
I'll just say that.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's one person that God has for you.
Yeah. I'm in that camp as well.
Yep. There's a movie made a long time ago called Minority Report, and I'm living it because I am.
I think that's what we love about this.
Yeah,
This whole conversation.
I'm about to be ganged up on. And, okay, let me give a couple prefaces.
Yeah.
First, one, I'm not saying I know this is
Right.
true.
Sure.
I
I don't think any of us can, right?
I know, but a lot of people make definitive claims that everybody has a soulmate, or no, nobody has a soulmate, that doesn't exist. And that makes me nervous. How do you know the unknowable? Number two, the older I get, the more I really do believe that, kind of like, I mean, all of y'all are parents, in the same way that parents operate differently with each of their children. I don't think everybody's story is the same. And I think even when it comes to this, it can look different for different people. I think there may be some people that, that the parents, like, God in essence, if you have the playground scenario, I'm trusting you and I'm going to guide you. And then I think there's some situations, we see this in other areas of life, where God has a specific providential plan in place that may be different than the way he deals with others. The third preface I would lay down is, I also am just going to put the obvious on the table and say I'm the only single guy at this table. So
There's a reason why
I don't have
this theology does not serve you well, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't have personal proof of product on this as of
So
yet.
at what point do you change your theology?
Yeah.
And get married, or do you?
The personal jabs are coming quick. Let me just say that.
You're the one that brought it up.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you can insult yourself.
Okay, sorry.
But no, I think so. So for me, I would say, I have a lot of thoughts to that. I don't think it's a theology that creates an action of passivity. I'll say that, because I think there's.
It was more of a joke.
I know,
obviously.
but see, I think there's two extremes people can look at. I think there's the extreme of, like, God's never involved at all when it comes to relationships. But I do think some people, and as a joke, but there are people that can fall in any area of spirituality on the line of fatalism. Of God will do it, so there's nothing I need to. And there are people, I think, that approach relationships that way. It doesn't matter if I'm a jerk. Doesn't matter if I become the kind of person. Doesn't matter if I never go out. I can be a horrible person and stay inside my house, and God will bring the person. And I don't think either of those are healthy. I tend to look at this. I think the way I look at almost any other area of life is there's God's part and there's my part. And I think I probably, just more than most people, think God is actively, strategically involved to a pretty deep degree.
With you finding, or with anyone finding their one person.
With people that are meant to be married. Again, I don't think everybody's meant to be married. There are people that don't want to be married. I think some people call it a singleness.
I agree.
But the way I look at it is, and we talked like off screen, how do you talk about this without getting super theological? But here's what I would say. In the same way that, Paul says in Ephesians, before the foundations of the world, God created those of us in Christ to do good works. Like, there are works laid out beforehand for me to do. I believe, even Arminians, non-Calvinists, believe in what's called Prevenient Grace, that God's the initiator. He's the author and the finisher of my faith, that no one can come unless the Spirit draws them to the Father. I believe in the same way that God is that actively involved and behind the scenes and working in my life in the spiritual. For me, almost psychologically, like, I would want to believe, and biblically I do believe, that in the most intimate parts of my life, God is also involved and working and active and has a plan.
So, go ahead. Are you done?
Yeah.
Let's flesh that out. So, like, that sounds, I understand what you're saying theologically, but, like, when it comes to this principle of, okay, if you're someone who is supposed to be married and God is strategically and actively involved in it, what does that look like on a practical level?
What do you mean?
Well, okay, so I won't personalize it, but just say person X, whoever that person is. There's someone, as you stated, who is supposed to be married. If God is working and trying to, has a plan for them to marry someone, what are some of the things that would be happening in the background or moving, or that would cause that reality to happen?
I don't know, because I think it looks so different for everybody. I mean, again, I would okay, let's put this side by side with another area. Like, because to me, it's almost the same question of, let's say you are called to ministry. What does that look like? Well, it's different for everybody. I think if you were to say, what does it look like if you're called to ministry and God's going to make it happen? Again, you would show, okay, what's God's part? What's your part? Well, God calls. I believe God orchestrates. And maybe we would even differ. Actually, I think we probably even differ theologically on some of this. But I believe God would work behind the scenes in ways, even eternal ways that we can't see, to connect us with people that he is going to use to take us places in ministry. Yeah. He's going to anoint us. He's going to send people. He's going to speak to us. He's going to do those things. And the person who feels called into ministry is going to have their part. They're going to try to make sure their heart's postured the right way. They're going to try to stay close to Jesus so that they hear the voice of God and move the right way. So I guess to me, when I look at people's lives that have gotten married, I see the same thing. I see imperfect people who, to the best of their ability, are striving to follow Jesus. And I see in each scenario, I mean, all three of your marriages and how you met your wives look so different. So it's hard to answer that. But what I would say is that I do believe God in ways that, probably some ways the three of you could look back and see, and probably ways you won't know till you get to heaven. God has orchestrated moments. God has worked behind the scenes. God has put things in place that have led to that moment happening, where you met, where you fell in love.
Can I ask you a question? I want to back up because you kind of restated something, but I didn't know if you said this. Are you saying that you believe that there are certain people who are, shall I say, predestined? And I hate to use that term because I don't mean it in like salvific type of way, but are predestined to be married, some who aren't?
Predestined's a strong word.
I know. I don't mean it to be that strong, but
that's what I think that's the phrase you use.
But I'm asking because I think that's a pretty significant statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul says, all of this that we're talking about, the tension is the mysterious overlap of where our free will and God's sovereignty comes in, right?
Yeah.
So even if you use a word like predestined, which I don't even love.
Sure.
When I say meant to be married, what I mean is the mingling of God gives us free will. And I believe, like Paul said, some of you desire to be single. Some of you desire to be married. So what I mean by that is I believe if God has put a desire in your heart for marriage, then that desire is from God. And I believe most of the time, if he's put something in your heart, he's put it there for a reason. And so when I say meant for marriage, that's what I mean. Not like whatever you want, God's going to force you as a robot to get married. No. I just mean, I believe there's I believe, and this is probably most people, God has put the desire in their heart to be married, and so they will get married.
Yeah, I think there's an internal, like a predestination, not in anything spiritual, but almost in the way we're wired for companionship, for this ideal of marriage, of joining together. The reason why I say that is just because the way Paul describes this in 1 Corinthians 7, he speaks more of it as a decision or a choice, not as in something that was decided or chosen.
That is very true. 1 Corinthians 7, when he talks about it,
he says,
he's the most unromantic person on the planet.
Right. And he says, he said, some of you this, and if your urges, you can't control them, then go and get married. But I wish some of you would want to be single so that you can remain dedicated to the Lord as I am. So my point is this, I don't go to the extreme of thinking that you're meant to be married or you're not meant to be married. I think that when I look at even just from the bigger picture of Genesis and the early picture of the garden, like we're not meant to be alone. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't choose to be single and still find companionship and community and other people. So I'm not saying that's, Jesus was single. I don't think there's something wrong with being single. I know people who've chosen to be single. There are all kinds of people who go into the ministry they choose to give up, marriage, and because certain traditions require that in order for it. And I almost don't get the sense that Paul necessarily doesn't want to be married. He's chosen this because of the calling on his life. And so that's why it's hard for me to kind of go all the way to kind of that extreme of that there's like a mandate almost, like, well, you're mandated, or and I know that's such a harsh word, that I'm trying to find another word, meant to be married versus not. I think the overlap, I think, is more the opportunity. The design is in us. The opportunity is there. If somebody's desire to serve God and their passion to serve God supersedes, and their calling feels like another. I mean, there could be some people, I can understand this. If you're like, I feel called to go reach the most dangerous terrorist group in the world.
Yeah.
I think probably the thing I would not want to do is get married and take my wife with me.
Yeah.
So there's some of those where I go, I want to choose singleness because this is my calling and I want to go do it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more of a freedom. I think you agree there's obviously freedom in here. None of us at this table, I think that God is pulling strings like we're marrying puppets, that, you know what I mean, that we don't have any control. I think when it gets down into the nitty gritty of the question that we've kind of wrestled with in joking, fun kind of way, this is light. These are deep things, but in a lighthearted way but is there one? In other words, and if I don't end up with that one, this is the age-old question: did God fail or did I fail? If I pick the wrong one, did I just screw up somebody else's one?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. Or if somebody got divorced and then they meet someone else and it seems like they're meant to be, were they with the wrong person? Or did they fail when they were with the one, and then because of that, God is redemptive, and now they have another one, but they were originally intended for the first one. I mean, it goes into so many different layers of complexity and confusion that I think is really hard to kind of.
So I have a lot of thoughts.
I know.
I have a lot of thoughts.
And I don't want, and hey, I know that you're.
I like the odds. I'm good with it. Bring it on.
No, I know you're on like
me against the world.
A little bit of a different side.
Was it Ohio against the world?
Yeah, and so I don't want. I'm not trying to put you on there. And so if somebody else has a thought for or against, it doesn't matter.
But let me just respond to a couple. So one, I definitely would never use the language of someone's mandated to be single or married. Again, I think this is where, and I'm not reformed, but this is where I have.
It certainly feels like it.
I'm not. I saw
the fire in your eyes.
So y'all jokingly call me reformed, and I jokingly call y'all deists. I would, because it's funny. Okay, a few things. One, I would never use the word mandate. Again,
it's a bad word. I agree.
When I say meant to be, I just mean if someone has the desire, and I believe God-given desire to be married and ends up getting married, I would use that language almost retroactively of like that was their destiny to get married. That was a desire God gave them. That was meant for them.
Okay.
I don't think God works in the sense of, I really want to be single, but I feel like God's making me.
Sure.
I don't think that's the way it works. So I don't mean it in any sense like that.
Right.
Also, I forget who said it, but I love it. The moment you say I do, they're the right person. So I think that's where the romantic side of me, because it's all of us think we have objective theology and none of us do.
Right.
So I'll admit, for me, part of this is probably biographical. Part of this is probably the way I'm wired as a hopeless romantic. Part of this may be lingering 2% of the reformed side of me, and I just believe God's so big. I get all that. But just psychologically, for me, because I think you said at one point, you said for you it would be discouraging or paralyzing to believe there's a one. Or something like that.
Maybe.
I definitely did not say that, honey.
Not you.
I just want you to know I didn't say that. Just FYI, I want to make sure it's clear who he's pointing to.
Maybe.
Okay.
You mean in the sense that
I would own it if I did.
You would be afraid that you picked the wrong one.
I would say that if I was single and believed that there was a one, I would be paralyzed.
Afraid to even act.
Well, that happens to a lot of people.
There's no way in 7 billion people I'm picking the right one.
Yes. Yes.
And the reason I bring that up, okay, can I ask this? Did you feel like that before you got married?
No, because I didn't think there was a one.
Okay. Because I've heard people say that, and I'm not speaking for all single people, but usually when I've heard people use that argument, it's from married people. I'm just one person, but I got to tell you, psychologically, I experienced that way differently. if I didn't believe that that God was that involved in my life on an intimate detail level, on such a crucial aspect of my life, that he was big enough to know what I needed and bring that to me, that's where I would be psychologically paralyzed.
But why wouldn't you say that God already did when he created woman for man?
Because like he just said, there's like 5 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, if you
Opposite
split
sex,
male and female.
Sure. Okay.
So to me, well, let me finish this, because to me, what would be more psychologically paralyzing is to feel like I got to figure it all out on my own and hope I get it right. To me, and again, I think there's extremes you could fall on. There's the extreme of God's not involved at all,
Sure.
or fatalism and God's going to do all the work. I believe there's God's part and my part. And so I think for me, like, so I was listening to, I think I told a couple of y'all, I was listening to John Bevere on his daughter-in-law's podcast. And I resonate with this because he talks about, they were like, how did you and Lisa meet? And they have this such a supernatural story. And he said, well, I dated a few different girls, and finally I came to the place. I said, well, God, I need you to pick because you know what's best for me. And you also know, not that people don't have free will in 10 years. He's like, if in 10 years they'll cheat on me. Like, things I don't know. Sure. And so, God, I'm trusting you to pick. Now, some people can say, well, that's an abdication of, whatever. But for him, it was like, no, there's like, I don't even know if I trust. And so, God, you pick. And then, I mean, he told the story. Everybody's story is different. This really supernatural story. And he goes, and some people would not agree with this interpretation, but he talks about Genesis, how Adam didn't go having to look, and try to figure it out, but God brought Eve to him. And so for him, that was his comfort, that he felt like God highlighted that verse after he made that commitment. God, I choose you to pick. I'm not picking, you pick.
Yeah.
And then God supernaturally orchestrated things that could have never happened any other way. And, 30 years later, blessed marriage. And so, and I know this, everybody's story is different. That's why I'm saying I don't think it always works like that. But for me, I'm just saying, theologically, whether it's right or wrong, psychologically, to me, it would be way more terrifying to not be convinced that God, in the most intimate, important parts of my life, is not that involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I think, again, neither one of us, probably none of us at this table living in the extremes. So I agree. I'm not going to fall to that side either. I personally think that God is involved as much as we invite him into the process. And so in dating, and when I was dating my wife, or soon to be wife at some point, right? There's moments where in that process of realizing relatability and like, hey, this is the person that's my best friend, and I do want to spend the rest of my life with this person, that I obviously, and my wife, we both invited God into the process. Like we did, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but we took seriously in praying about it, asking people in our lives who are spiritual authorities and other people, what do you think about, and listening. And so I believe in I believe God is active in our lives without necessarily pre-choosing that person for us.
Because what I hear you saying,
He gives us the freedom, and I think when you invite God into that process, then he leads you. That's why I'm saying I don't have the fear either way. I understand the one extreme and the other extreme. I didn't have that kind because I was walking with God, and I'm going, God, help me. Is she the person that I should spend the rest of my life with? And not even in the sense like, well, if I found somebody else, that they wouldn't be the person, but I have this person right in front of me. And
it sounds like you're saying because there's a difference between I'm going to invite God's wisdom, which is awesome.
Confirmation.
Wisdom, confirmation. There's a difference between that and God's wisdom and God's activity of God's been the one bringing that person to you. Because I think part of it is like...
But none of us know that. At least, right? None of us know that.
Sure.
And that may not have been the case. I mean, I just think of all of the small decisions that were made for me. I'll give you an example, right? I grew up most of my life in Ohio.
Yep.
My parents make the decision to move to Germany. I lived in Germany for 3 years, right? My wife's in our old church here in Ohio. I wasn't even really close friends. She was friends with my sister. I wasn't even, knew who she was. I wasn't close friends or anything like that. Mm-hmm. My parents make the decision when we graduate to move back home. I guess God made the decision for them to move us back home, right? They made the decision to move back to Ohio. I end up somehow making the decision to go back to my old church that they did not go. So when you follow the trail of all these small decisions, it ultimately leads to me and her ending up together.
And see, when I hear that story, you know what I hear?
Yeah.
Hand of God, hand of God, hand of God, hand of God.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the tension point.
But that's almost it is to me almost a cop-out, because that means you're automatically saying what happened always is the hand of God.
That's how I feel.
That to me is a total cop-out answer.
No.
100%. Because what if I decide to move to Florida and I'm married to Lisa in Florida? Then you would go, hand of God, because you decided to go and God had Lisa for you, not Laura Lee for you.
No, because when someone chooses to walk contrary to Jesus, then a lot of times what they're going to do is walk in a way that is contrary to the hand of God that will be on their lives. What you described was obedient steps that you were taking, obedient steps your parents were taking, and the wisdom and the mercy of God. I think all four of us at this table could look back on seasons, even when we were obedient to God, that God's hand and grace was still on our lives. I just think it's just so interesting that in so many other areas of life, we would invoke the sovereignty of God, whether we're Calvinist or Arminian. Every single time any one of the four of us pray, God soften their heart. What are we asking? Mm-hmm. We're invoking sovereignty. We're saying, God, I want you to be active. I want you to change things. I want you to be, and so the tension point always is, okay, where is the sovereignty versus where's the free will mix? Mm-hmm. None of us know, but I think it's just, to me, if there's any places in the big places of life, to me, it would be terrifying and disheartening not to believe that God is actively working and orchestrating behind the scenes. I see that, and I see two things at play. I see free will, you making decisions, and I also see, in a mysterious way, the mysteries in the overlap. The mystery is in the overlap between our free will and God's sovereignty. And I see in that humans making free will choices, and in and through that, in a mysterious way, God's hand at work to bring you to each other.
So I just have to, point of order here. I want to cut through, and I want to go back to the beginning of this conversation, because we all answered with a clear yes or no, and you gave 3 prefaces, and you said something that sounded good, but as I've been thinking about it, you said that no one knows for sure, so you don't want to take any hard stance on it theologically. But as we're talking, it seems like you actually are more on the no side. You just are on the greater sense of God's more involved in the process than not, in terms of, is there a one? And we won't personalize it for just you or for people. So my question, because we all said definitively no, and God's involved somewhat, but it seems like as you've been arguing, as I've been listening, that you are probably more on the no side too. You're just arguing for a greater level of sovereignty in it.
No.
So the question is do you think, yes or no, and we won't personalize it to you, but is there one person, 4 people?
Well, I answered it in the second preface, which is, I think sometimes, not always. Because what I said is, I think that in the same way that parents operate differently with their children, I believe God operates differently with each of his children. So, like I said, I don't know for sure, but I do lean more on the side of yes. I do think there are many cases in which, and again, maybe some of these are the exception, but I wanted to get confirmation on this. I'm texting with my buddy Brian today. My buddy Brian Roby, some of y'all met him. He came up here. He was the kids director at New Life where I'm. And for context, Brian is the most, he struggles, he almost struggles with any kind of Pentecostal spirit field. He's the most he describes himself as vanilla. Wears khakis, polo every day, very cerebral, very rational, not given to emotion, the opposite of hyper spiritual. But his story of how he met his wife, 3 years before they met, God started giving him dreams where he saw his wife's face. And then in the last dream, there was written on a wall the word opal. And then after that, he went to Catalina Island in California, walked across the cafeteria at a vacation Bible school, and saw the face that he'd seen in his dreams for 3 years, and she was wearing opal earrings. Now, he didn't say anything for a couple of years because he didn't want to be manipulative, and so he never told her, but that became his wife. And so my personal thing is I look, there's so many stories like that. And I've done premarital counseling for 2 couples over this last month that I'm like looking at the details of their stories, and I know we all come with a perspective in mind. So I admittedly have a filter, but I'm looking at the stories. I'm like, how did God not orchestrate all these details? And then part of me, look, it's not hard in our day and age to get a date. You know, there's apps. People love to hang out.
Some people might disagree with you on that. So,
well,
you might.
I feel like we live in a day and age where, for the most part, you know, it's not hard to find somebody that you get along with.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, most people by a certain age are married. But to find somebody, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, it's funny. On the same flight to France, because I'm watching all these old movies, I watched my favorite rom-com from when I was in high school. Hugh Grant, Notting Hill. You ever seen it? It's like my favorite rom-com ever. And Hugh Grant gave this little speech. I know it's just a movie, but you know, he owns this bookstore, and they're setting him up with all these different people. And he finally one night, he's gone on all these dates. They're great girls, but they're just, you know, they're not quote unquote the one that he's met yet. And he's talking to his sister who has not a perfect marriage, but a great marriage. And he just tells her, he goes, I think because you've been married so long, you forget what a miracle it is that you have. He's like, I think you forget how rare it really is for you to meet someone that there's not only a connection and attraction to and that you love, but that's returned. And so I say that to say, not that I think it's the convenient theory of people that are already married, but I think it can be easy if your story's not as wild as Brian's, where you have multiple dreams, where you see the person's face and you see opal earrings, to not realize actually how big of a miracle, in my opinion, it is the way God orchestrates and brings an Adam and Eve together, a man and woman together, for a purpose. And so I look at the ordinary stories and the Brian stories, and I could be completely wrong, but I look at it and I just think, man, God was behind that. Like, God put that together.
I don't think there's much room for, you know, here's what's funny is the belief that God is behind the ordinary and the crazy, right? We just can't see it. Parallels with determinism, which is a basic tenet of atheism. In other words, everything is set in motion. We can't change it. I'm not, and I know you don't fully subscribe to that
at all.
I know you don't fully subscribe to that, but that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying they get really cloudy. You can't really tell, and we don't know. None of us know, and that's the challenge and the fun of debating all this is none of us really know.
Yeah,
and you know, there's so many scenarios.
I don't think things are preset.
Yeah. Well,
I don't live, and this kind of goes back to what you said. This kind of what you said as far as like the fear of like, oh, I could miss the. See, to me, I'm going to give another, since I'm in the minority. I told y'all. To me, I thought this was fascinating. Reading Dr. Henry Cloud, one of the most non-hyper spiritual, brilliant. He's the most well-known Christian psychologist, and in his autobiography, he tells his story. And his story was he dated a lot of girls. Some were great, some not so great. And then one day, he just feels like almost audibly says, pick up the Bible. And it's the story of, you know, Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And it feels like God speaks directly to him and says, I'm about to send you the one I have for you. And the whole thing was Rachel represented people he had chemistry and connection, you know, physical attraction to. And Leah represented the character, you know, and the integrity. And he said, when I send you the one, she's going to be Rachel and Leah. There's going to be chemistry and compatibility, chemistry and character. And so I look at that. And so to me,
I mean, I think that's the hope everybody has,
right.
For her that they.
So, yeah,
I mean, I think
that's a suitable spouse. For
I mean, I
anybody.
think that's what you're. Yeah.
But I think his point was,
What's her name, Leah?
You've been trying to figure it all out, and I'm making you a promise. I'm going to send you someone, and here's what they're going to be like.
Sure.
To me, a healthy place of those I know who subscribe to this is not, because I guess I don't get the whole I would live in fear, I'd miss it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think things are preset. I think you can live like hell and miss everything God would have for you. So I don't buy into determinism at all. But I also don't think it's a tightrope where God's playing hide and seek of, oh, you got to figure it all out. I guess to me, almost just like anything else in life, like if you're not perfect, but you're following Jesus to the best of your ability, he's going to give you things and give you peace about it. And he's going to make it obvious and make it clear and make it easy. I think that's one of the things that John Bevere said that I think probably single people were really encouraged by is he said, look, every time I did the wrong person, there was just never peace. He said, but when God brought the right one, and he's like, and I've noticed this in counseling young people, he's like, immediately the one God had for them, peace is like a river because it's the one that he had planned. So,
yeah.
I don't know. You've been quiet. What are all your devil's advocates?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I get where you're coming from. I think I'm curious what you think about this because you're the hopeless romantic side of you, the one or whatever. I would argue that actually saying that no, I chose my wife under my own free will is actually a more romantic thought than she was my one that I found, and she didn't pick me. We're just compatible and we work together, and so she's my one. No, it's we choose each other every single day. I actually think that's a more romantic thought.
See, I get that. I don't, and this is the side of me, again, where I hold up God's activity and our free will, and I see them in symmetry, not in contradiction. Because to me, if God has one for you, there's no persuasion on his part of this is what you have to do. To me, the obviousness in it is what you're saying. It's, oh, I have this choice, because there's always a choice. It's always a choice, brother. Where am I quoting?
No idea.
Desmond, lost. Come on. But to me, the beauty is where the two meet. Where if God has someone for you, part of the evidence is they're the one, is there's going to be an explosion of affection of, oh, I want this person. I get to choose this person. And then like you said, because somebody else's devil's advocate is like, well, I don't think there's a perfect person. The belief, at least that I know of people who believe there's one out there for you, is not this Pollyannish, oh, that person's perfect, so you're going to have a great, easy marriage. No, part of the idea of, I think the mature idea, whether it's right or wrong, if God has somebody for you, is it's not just to satisfy the desires of your heart, but what you need. And that no matter how great that person is, marriage is going to be a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice and a lot of dying to self and a lot of, like you said, choosing each other on the days you feel like it and you don't feel like it. But I don't see a competition between God bringing someone to you and you choosing, oh, this is the person I want.
So if that's the case, well, hold on. If that's the case, and the problem is I think this whole argument becomes very circular because I feel like anything that is brought up, and to your defense, you have to, anything is brought up, it just moves the gray line between God's sovereignty and our choice. Well, no, it's God brought it, but then you still get to choose it. That
well, so, I just say that when I feel like
I'm just
you're being
saying
deistic.
there's not. What I'm saying is there's no landings. There's no landing ground for you.
Yeah.
With that point, everything I've heard has been bouncing around like, well, no, but God's bringing it, but you still get to choose. So if God brings someone to you, but what if God was bringing someone different to Jesse, but he chose Sarah? So what I'm saying is you land back on, no, that's not who God brought. God brought Sarah. So whenever you do that, there's not a position. I mean, it is a position. It's just not. There's no point in having a dialogue about it.
I would just call it a biblical position.
No, it's not biblical
because there's mystery. Because
it's not biblical.
I'm always going to deflect when I feel like there's a binary argument that is completely all free will, devoid of any of God's involvement or activity.
Sure.
So what you call a deflection, I call a symmetry.
Right.
There is a symmetry, and we would argue this for any other area of life.
Yeah,
between God's
well, that's why I'm thinking about what
activity,
what Paul says in Colossians. Whatever you find to do it with all your might. for the Lord. Like there's
Yeah.
the freedom that God gives us to choose, and there's inviting God into the process. And I think that's the biggest difference is, I think my take, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, is that God has given me because he loves me. He gives me the freedom. There's a lot of people. I mean, when I think about the amount of people who've gotten married and divorced that I've known, it, in the wake of it, I don't know what to make of it. All of them missed it. They all got the wrong person, or they got the right person, but then they became the wrong person. Now they're remarried to the wrong person because it was supposed to be the first person. So it gets so complex and so confusing to like, because the biggest underlying challenge in all of this is if it doesn't work, you can sit here and go, God brought Sarah. Maybe he did. I'm not saying he didn't. They got married. 5 years from now, they get divorced. She turns, she leaves, and you leave room for that. That people can make a decision to do all that, right? Do all that. The other answer is, well, she was never God's chosen one in the first place. Picked the wrong one. And so it's not an arguable position. None of it is, I guess is what I'm saying. And so I think it is one of those things that it feels like, to me, it falls in the category of none of us know, which we don't when it comes to this. And then it just kind of, this sounds so simplistic. It feels like if you're a hopeless romantic, this is how you see it. If you're not a hopeless romantic, this is probably not how you see it. None of us see it clearly. You know, none of us see it clearly. We don't. I will agree that none of us know where the activity of God and the activity of humanity meet. I think we do see scripturally, it doesn't seem like God overrides our choice or our decision.
Yeah.
We live with the results
agree
and
with
the
that.
consequences of it. I do believe that it's kind of like saying, well, this miracle happened. Well, that miracle always happens. No, that's the definition of a miracle. It happened once, right? It happened there. And I think that there are situations like the situations that you mentioned where God actually gives people who are, by the way, all of them you mentioned, following Jesus, pursuing him, wanting the best, that God gives them a vision, a picture of a person, or, hey, wait for this kind of person because I want you to be with the right person. However they received it. The idea of that, to me, kind of just speaks more of that's the way I see sometimes God's activity rather than, oh, here's the one. And if Henry Cloud married the wrong person, well, he got with Rachel and he didn't get with Leah. I guess I don't see that in the picture. I see it more of that's the God's activity when people invite him into the process.
Well, and I want to add one nuance, not nuance, but just one thought. Even what you said one position's for the hopeless romantics and one's not. See, I feel like I'm a hopeless romantic. I mean,
Well, then maybe that falls apart there.
we can, I mean, you and I could probably trade stories for decades about the moments and the crying at the eternal flame at 2 a.m. in the pouring rain and the letters that you're burning the edges to make it appear like a special handcrafted note and dipped in ink and right. Okay.
You need to write a memoir.
No,
Wow, this is beautiful.
Yeah. Anyways.
You're making me cry.
So, yeah, I knew these two. But you mentioned psychologically, like just how it would freeze you, the idea of you have to pick the right one. See, to me, the position of no actually brought me great comfort because I got to understand that in this process, as I'm looking and trying to figure out who I'm going to choose, I feel like there was several people along points in my journey that, like, if I had maybe pressed in a little harder or done this or made this one decision, I might have ended up with someone different than who I ended up with. But instead of thinking about that or being paralyzed by like, oh, what if or whatever, I'm like, God, I trust you that you're going, whoever I end up with, that this is going to be an incredible part of your story and you working in this. And I don't have to figure out who this one person is, whoever. I have to find the person who I am most compatible with and the timing's right and it all works out. And yes, you do things where you explore like, okay, is this the right fit? Let's talk to friends and family. And when I found that with Rebecca, I feel like I didn't have all the answers, but I just knew that like, okay, God is going to be in the rest of the details and I'm trusting. And so there was a great comfort for me in that as I was had different places or options I could have gone to.
Yeah.
There was a comfort that came from that.
Well, and I think that's beautiful. I think that's very wise. And, it's funny. I texted my buddy Cole. I was like, what do you, because I've been texting me. I was like, I'd be curious what you think. And kind of like you say, he said, I feel like yes and no. Like, I feel like there could be several people and then God could bless. And I believe, and that kind of goes back to, you can call it cop out, whatever, but I feel like this is where God, I think, operates differently with different ones of his children. And I think what you said is wise. And it's funny, I listened to a clip because I was, probably because we were talking about this. It was a 10-minute Stephen Furtick clip on this. He was talking about, is there a one? And of course, he was like, I don't think so. Yeah. But interestingly enough, he said, look, he goes, wherever you're at on is God in control. Maybe you're a 6, maybe you're more like a 10. Right. He said, psychologically, if it helps to believe that God's doing this, he's like, really is not as important as like your faithfulness in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think, again, I don't want to believe anything just because it's convenient to believe. I want to believe it's true.
Yeah.
But I do think God just wires us all psychologically a little differently, and to your point about the miracles, the first thing that pops in my mind is C.S. Lewis's definition of a miracle. Stories that God writes in letters so large because and letters so small because we can't see the large ones. And so I think my point in bringing up the big ones, because I don't know if you read it yet, but in that story with Henry Cloud, he goes on to talk about all the details about how it was obvious this was the one that God confirmed is the one God had for him.
I think God brings signs. He brought signs into our situation too when you're looking for it.
Yeah. And so I guess I would just say, like, whether the letters are small or large, I just consider it a miracle when God brings two people together like that, in my mind.
Yeah. And I see the miracle. And he may, obviously, there's people, I see the miracle happening in the decision to get married. And there's the miracle. There's the you joining together. What God joins together, let no one separate. And I think that's a miracle you have to work, as you said. Like it's a decision you have to make every day because, I think if it helps you, like you said, Stephen Furtick says, psychologically to go, hey, this is, I feel like this is the one God brought for me. And you brings you peace and comfort in that decision. That's great. You still find out you got to work at it every single day. But then you can also take that into the hard times and go, but I feel like this is the person I'm supposed to be with. You know what I mean? And that can be one of those motivating things to go, as tough as it is right now, I'm here to stay.
Yep. Well, because I've heard people, that have been married years and years and decades, people that believe in the one, people that don't, say that very thing. It's just like, while I'm a hopeless romantic on maybe a soulmate kind of level, I'm not naive on the amount of work that a marriage is not a fairy tale.
Yeah.
And what I've heard so many people say, whether they believe in the one or not, is if possible, it is really powerful to have an early part of your story that is really visceral. So in the dark nights and on the boring days and on the frustrating days, you can go back and say, see, this is why. This is why we keep choosing each other. You look back on those moments. I think in ministry, that's powerful. Sure. We all know ministry. People think ministry is so easy and fun until you get into the nitty gritty of everyday ministry. Then you realize, this is real life. You're dealing, some days are great. Some days are really, you have to endure them. Yeah, because you're dealing with people. And so I don't know about y'all, but it's really helpful. For me, one of the things I do is go back to that calling that I feel like is undeniable, that God, you did that. Like you called that. Yeah. And so, again, I'm the single guy at the table. I have no proof of product. I'm admittedly in the minority and a hopeless romantic, but I don't know.
Good conversation.
Maybe I'm crazy.
No, it's fun conversation. No. None of us know. We just like to debate it. It's fun. It's kind of like, where does everybody fall on this? And I think people should let us know. I think they might. I think that might be fun.
Is there anybody out there who agrees with
there
me?
Are.
Yes.
I'm sure there are. I think it'd be fun. Let people, let us know. Drop a comment, reply with an email. Let us know where you land on it. I think or your thoughts why. I think it's fun. So, it's a good conversation.
Yeah.
Jesse, James, any last thoughts to close us out?
I got nothing.
No, it's good. It's been 50 minutes. It was a good conversation.
50 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Go watch Notting Hill. Until next time, Send in your thoughts. Let us know, and we will see you next time.
Hey guys, it's Russ. Thanks so much for listening. We really believe if we can get around tables instead of behind screens, if we can talk to each other instead of at each other, we can make the world better. To help us do that, here are a few things you can do to help. First, if you haven't yet, leave a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe on YouTube. This helps more than you know. Also, if you have been impacted by the community out of which this podcast comes, that's X Church. Maybe you're local or you've been touched by the messages and impact across the country, even the world. I want to encourage you to support this work. A powerful life principle is to invest in the people and places that invest in you. And so I want to invite you to do that right now by going to thex.church/give. You can give a one-time small gift, a sacrificial gift, or even become a recurring partner. Together, let's keep elevating the conversation, thinking higher, loving deeper, and making the world better. Cheers.